Anthony Kelley, and I am a composer, and I am composer in residence with the North Carolina Symphony, I'm glad to say, as of recently. And I also teach musical composition and theory and some African-American music at Duke University.
What does a composer do?
A composer creates music that people have not heard before, and sometimes a composer will rearrange music that we've heard before in ways that we haven't heard before. So we're responsible for sometimes making the sheet music that players can play to read that music, and sometimes we ourselves create our own music on whatever instrument we play.
What kind of music do you make?
My music I have often called new blues, because it is derived from a lot of more folkloric sounds in music that might be connected to blues. But I feel that sometimes what I do is distinctive from blues. This is the new part, because it folds in some traditions that sometimes blues might not account for so readily. For instance, I love symphonic music. I love the music of a Hungarian composer named Béla Bartók. I love music by Franz Liszt. I love Igor Stravinsky. I love Thelonious Monk. I love Duke Ellington. I love Mary Lou Williams. So all that music's rolling around in my head, and then add, George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, and add everything you can imagine that, most of everybody liked from the radio. And all of that is stewing around in my head. And then when I write music, I try to have it summarize how I process all of those different sounds. And that's why it's got a sort of folksy, I like to say, sort of music you would want to express on a porch with your friends, but it sometimes is performed by groups like symphony orchestras or chamber ensembles or solo pianists or vocalists or wind bands. New blues is what I like to call it.
Did you make music as a kid?
I studied piano, and my mom was a little hesitant to just buy a piano. They're very expensive. So she said, make an agreement with the custodian at the elementary school that you can practice until he's finished doing his work for the day, and then you can leave. So that's how I began to practice. I really valued being in that Pinkston Street Elementary School auditorium for those hours after everybody had left. It was just me and the piano and Mr. Steve, and he just let me do my thing. And then when he was done, he kicked me out and we locked up the building. That's how I practiced. And I was studying with a pianist who lived like diagonally in the house behind ours. She was a really brilliant pianist. Her name is Ms. Mayo White. She was she also taught at the junior high, more general subjects, but she was a great pianist in the area. And so Ms. White would guide me through learning Beethoven, like early on. I could barely read the music, but she would like place my fingers on the keys, and I learned pieces by Beethoven. She advanced me pretty quickly from just learning the notes to being able to play the Beethoven Pathetique Sonata. So this is going to connect to Beethoven, because this is really related to like one of my most formative experiences. Yeah. It was a junior high program at Henderson Junior High School that featured the Vance Senior High School concert band. And they played something to demonstrate to us what it's like to be in band. And it was full assembly in the auditorium. And they played an arrangement of the second movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. And this was for wind band, but it was played really beautifully. And I remember like that day, as if it were 5 seconds ago, I remember sitting there thinking, whatever that is, I want. And this is me in junior high school. I want to do that the rest of my life. And just the design of the melodies and the harmonies and the gestures and how it all just worked together and just made magic in the room. I was like, well, that's it. And it's still to this day one of my Desert Island pieces. So that moment of like exposure. Another really important one is that the North Carolina Symphony used to do tours.
What do you think is the hardest part about your job?
Every deadline is a haunting reminder of not only how much work there is to be done on a work that you're doing, but also how many ideas one is responsible for, sometimes in a very short period of time.
What are you writing for the North Carolina Symphony?
Yeah, when the symphony and I started talking about connecting what I do with what the North Carolina Symphony does, they said that they were interested in a piece around Juneteenth. And at the time, coincidentally, I was starting to write what I'm calling spirituals of liberation. And I call them spirituals because they're referential to like Negro spirituals, the early songs that were sung by enslaved people and have actually survived to this day, like Go Down Moses and, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, those kinds of songs. And I was writing some songs that I considered new spirituals in the way that I just said my style is a new blues. This is like referential to early Black music. And but it's got a little bit of a sort of like a more contemporary sort of edge to it. And I call them spirituals of liberation because we were kind of in the thick of the pandemic when we were having some of these conversations. And I was trying to envision a day where we would be a little more free to go our way. And so I was going to sort of celebrate liberation, not only from slavery and from oppression, but liberation from lockdowns as well. So I was trying to like cover a couple of bases in that title. And so these pieces are little short pieces that go together to form a suite.
Can we hear your music? What's the best part of your job?
The miracle of translation. That means I have ideas, I write them down. They're all living in my head and they sound a certain way, a really specific way. And a conductor, if this is going to an orchestra, a conductor gets her hands on the score and she looks through it and decides what she's going to emphasize in a rehearsal. And the orchestra individually, each player decides what they're going to emphasize. So there's a whole lot of factors where things could really change between what's living up here and what sounds in the room. And the miracle of the translation is that most of it, when you've really done your job, sounds very close to that original imagination. But very often the surprises are in what human beings bring from their own experience. And those surprises are not, they never bother me or offend me. They're just always like, ooh, I hadn't really imagined that would come out that way. Or there's a new angle to that blueprint that I laid out. And I'm okay with the little variants because this is a human endeavor and everybody's supposed to bring a bit of themselves to it. So no matter what I create, I love the idea that everybody, including me, will have surprises when we get in the concert hall.
How did you decide to become a composer?
One of my Henderson friend mentors, Mrs. Tharrington was her name. She said, I bought some symphony tickets for you and my nephew, and I want to take them to Raleigh to hear the symphony. We were like in junior high, we were like, whatever, let's do it. So she takes us in the car from Henderson to Raleigh, and they play with Billy Taylor, the great jazz pianist, was featured. I think I still literally have the ticket stub from that concert. And so my first experience of seeing the North Carolina Symphony in the concert hall in Raleigh was with jazz included in the performance. And they did some classical as well, but like this blending of multiple styles is why I'm probably a new blues artist. Beyond that, I began to study composition I studied theory with Mr. Valentine in boarding school. Then I studied composition with Robert Ward. And as a senior at Duke, Robert Ward used these words when he was about to sort of have our last lesson. He said, if you ever consider, really doing this for a living. And the funny thing is, before that, I had never thought about that. But because he proposed the if, that changed my life.
How does living in North Carolina affect your music?
A lot of ways. I told you, first of all, North Carolina Symphony is one of those major factors. I'm not just trying to plug it. I'm like empirically saying that's actually what happened. But the other ways would be having a place that's comfortably not formally urbane. In other words, a place that's, comfortably suburban or rustic when I wanted to. I spent a lot of time down in Candor, North Carolina. That's in Montgomery County. And there's tobacco farms and peach farms and, not much else out there except those fields. And those were some of my summers. And I remember that being part of life growing up. The organic nature of like being in the woods, walking through the woods, observing the wildlife around us, like the frogs and the raccoons and you name it, turtles. All of that is something that one of my mentors, Ollie Wilson at Berkeley, he said that music is human experience transformed. So it's like there's no separation in my head. The way that a tree grows on the side of the highway has a form that's going to inform how I'm going to shape a composition. I see there are a lot of analogies in like the profile of a region. That sounds a little abstract, but I honestly believe that to be true.
How do we prepare students to be successful in the arts?
So I have a philosophy about that, which is that if you ask me how would we prepare a group of students for success as a soccer or a basketball or a football team, everyone would say like the physical conditioning is gonna be really important. You got to have them run on the field. You got to teach them how to use the ball or whatever the tools are. Like really with precision, right? Like you got to really train them, but some of that physical aspect, the muscle of it is important with athletics. And the human imagination is the muscle of the arts. And you can't just like jump into the imagination and jump out of it. It has to be constantly worked, just like the muscle of an athlete. You wouldn't expect a football player to just jump on the field after doing nothing for 2 years, right? They had to be working up unto that. So like the imagination is something that schools and society should certainly find ways of systematically like conditioning, just like you condition the muscles of athletes. Being able to imagine, like in the broadest sense, it just prepares you for life. It prepares you for how to improvise when you need to improvise, prepares you for how to communicate when you need to communicate. It prepares you how to empathize when someone's not in a situation that you're normally in, because imagination is part of that, right?
Yeah.
So the answer is like we condition the imagination of our young people, and that's the way.
What else would you like to share with us?
That I am still a student of North Carolina. But as I grew up from being a young student into a student who got to explore the world, is yes, enjoy the perks of being in this wonderful state that encourages you at your best. It's a wonderful place to be a student. At the same time, prepare yourself to explore beyond so you can really appreciate if you ever come back. So like be open to all experiences, whether they be here in North Carolina or some experiences that might be out in other states or in other countries. And keep at your core the things that are the most valuable aspects of being. So here's something for us to all think about since we're North Carolinians. The state motto is esse quam videre, to be rather than to seem. So don't go out as a poser, and you don't have to do a whole lot of trying to impress people. Just be, and be rooted, and be clear and lucid, and immerse yourself into things sincerely, and then participate in the society and do the best around you. And that's the most you can hope for, really.